in Mago Reddit. Today's story is...
My mother-in-law manipulated my sick father-in-law, accused me of theft, and celebrated her victory, until her will demolished his life and sent her to prison. I am experiencing a mixture of anger, pain, and betrayal. My father-in-law Henry has just passed away, and instead of being able to mourn his loss as I should, all that occupies my mind is how unfair our last goodbye was. Henry and I had a special relationship, closer than with any other member of my husband's family. He was a kind and intelligent man who always showed me respect, totally unlike my mother-in-law Patricia, about whom I will have much to say later. From the time Henry's illness began to deteriorate, I was one of the few people who really got involved in his care. I accompanied him to all his medical appointments, I took care of his documentation, and I spent hours sitting next to him when he only needed to talk because he was too weak to do anything else. And what did I get in return for all this? Betrayal? A few months ago, Patricia started accusing me of stealing money from Henry's bank account. She told everyone, including Henry himself. At first, I thought it was just another one of her mind games, but then I noticed that Henry started to behave differently towards me. He stopped trusting me and wouldn't let me help him like I used to. I didn't understand what had changed until I finally confronted my husband about it. He confessed that his mother had shown him supposed evidence of my theft. I almost lost my composure at that moment. I have never in my life taken anything that didn't belong to me. I have my job, my own money, and I have never needed anything from Henry. But Patricia, being the manipulator she is, surely falsified some evidence convincing enough for a man on his deathbed to believe her. And worst of all, it worked perfectly. Shortly before he passed away, Henry called my husband and me to his room to inform us that he had changed his will. He didn't go into much detail, but he made it very clear that, after seeing the supposed evidence presented by Patricia, he no longer felt he could trust me as he had before. I tried to defend myself, but he was already so weak and exhausted that he simply shook his head and said he had to do what was best for his family. That moment broke me completely. I spent years proving my worth in this family, making sure Henry was well looked after, reminding him to take his medication on time, doing everything I could to make his life more bearable while Patricia hardly lifted a finger for him. I was the one who ran errands when he was too weak to go out. I was the one who argued with the doctors to make sure he received proper care. I was the one who sat by his side for many nights. And in the end, it all came crashing down because of one of Patricia's lies. I tried to talk to Henry before he passed away, but he never wanted to see me alone. Patricia was always there. She knew she had won. She had manipulated a sick and vulnerable man into doubting me enough to change everything. And now he's gone, and I'll never get the chance to set the record straight. My husband Mark was completely devastated when Henry told us he had changed the will, but even so, he refused to confront him. He just kept saying that Henry was too ill, too tired, and that we should let him go in peace. He said that the important thing was that we knew the truth, but that wasn't enough. Not when Patricia and Ryan, my brother-in-law, got exactly what they wanted. And now I have to attend the wake and the funeral, pretending that everything is fine, while Patricia watches me with her arrogant smile. She has already started with her passive-aggressive comments, saying things like, "Well, I hope you can still find it in your heart to pay your respects, dear, after everything that's happened," as if she were the noble person in this situation, as if she hadn't spent the last few months manipulating Henry into giving more money to her unproductive son. Ryan, by the way, is beaming with happiness. He's going around acting like the grieving son, when in reality all he cares about is the money. He has already started talking about his plans once the will is officially read: a new car, a trip to Bali, maybe investing in a business portfolio, which, knowing Ryan, means blowing all the money in a few months and then running back to Patricia to ask her for more, because he invested, in inverted commas, in the next big opportunity. Or rather, in another cryptocurrency with no real value. I feel like I'm going to be sick just thinking about it. I don't even know if I can bear it. The idea of sitting there, watching everyone cry as I learn the truth of what really happened, turns my stomach. and I know that Patricia will be watching me the whole time, enjoying the fact that she won this battle. But what hurts the most is knowing that Henry believed her. It doesn't matter how hard I try to convince myself that he was ill, vulnerable, and manipulated. In his last days, when he should have known who to trust, he doubted me. He really believed that I was capable of stealing from him. And I don't know if I will ever be able to forgive him for that. I keep imagining different scenarios that could happen. If I attend, I know that Patricia will take every opportunity to rub it in my face. She will play her part as a grieving widow, pretending to be devastated, when in reality she is satisfied that she has got what she wanted. Her plan worked perfectly. And Ryan will be by her side, counting the minutes until he can get his hands on the inheritance that awaits him. If I don't attend, people will talk. They'll whisper about how I wasn't even able to show up to say goodbye. Patricia will use that to her advantage, turning it into further proof that Henry was right to change the will. I feel like no matter what I do, I'll lose out. But maybe that's exactly what Patricia wants to achieve. The worst thing is that I'm not interested in the will at all. I only cared about my relationship with Henry. What bothers me is that the people who deserve it the least are probably the ones who will get the money. I don't know if I will have the strength to get through the funeral without breaking down. I don't know if I will be able to watch my husband cry for his father while all I feel is anger and sadness at how it all ended. But one thing I am sure of, this is far from over. Update 1. After debating whether or not I should attend the wake, I finally sat down with my husband Mark and we had a heart-to-heart about it. I explained how much I feared going, how I couldn't bear the idea of being there while Patricia gloated in her victory. I told him how angry and hurt I felt that Henry had died believing I was a thief, and how I wasn't sure I could grieve properly. To his credit, Mark did not dismiss my feelings. He is also suffering the loss, but he acknowledged that part of him feels partially responsible for how his mother manipulated the whole situation. He told me that Henry was not only my loss, but also his, and that it pained him to know that his father's last days were poisoned by Patricia's lies. We sat there for a long time, talking about everything that had happened, and finally we came to a decision. We will not attend the wake. Neither of us sees any point in subjecting ourselves to Patricia's fake tears and Ryan's arrogant attitude. We know exactly how it will all play out. Patricia will put on a show, Ryan will act like the perfect grieving son, and the whole thing will be a performance designed to make Mark and I look like the villains. We refuse to play along. However, we will attend the funeral. Not for Patricia, not for Ryan, but because Henry was someone we loved before he was manipulated. And like it or not, we have to be present for the reading of the will that will happen afterwards. We know that Patricia made sure that Henry modified it in her and Ryan's favor, of course, but at this point, it's not even about the inheritance anymore. And as expected, Patricia is already doing everything she can to distort the story in her favor. Now she's telling the family that Mark and I are not helping at all with the funeral arrangements. She's presenting herself as the grandmother who can't even get her own son to help. But the truth is that she's been stopping us from helping all along. Ever since Henry died, every time Mark or I tried to offer our help, she ignored us. She pushed us aside, or she said that everything had already been arranged. But the situation is getting worse. Patricia is now telling everyone that she was the one who convinced Henry not to press charges against me for theft. She's acting as if I should be grateful to her because, according to her, Henry wanted to take legal action, but she told him it wasn't worth it, that he should simply consider the money I allegedly took as an early inheritance. In her version of events, Henry was furious with me and wanted to punish me, but she, the ever-compassionate and merciful wife, convinced him to let it go. I can't express how disgusting it is to hear this. Not only did I never steal a penny from Henry, but now Patricia is acting as if she were the reason I wasn't arrested. But I know that trying to argue with her now will only give her more power. She feeds off distorting reality, and the more I fight, the more she will twist the story in her favor. So I won't. Instead, I will smile at the funeral, sit at the reading of the will, and when it's all over, Mark and I will cut Patricia and Ryan out of our lives completely. The people I care about know the truth. and that's all that matters. At this point, the inheritance isn't even the most important thing anymore. It would be satisfying to receive a share just to annoy Patricia, no doubt. But at the end of the day, the real victory will be to get away from them for good. If all this mess ends with Mark and I removing them from our lives forever, then that's all that matters. She and Ryan belong in the trash, where they've always been. And soon, that's exactly where they'll stay. Update 2. The last day of Henry's wake is approaching, just 2 days away, and I was completely determined to stay away from Patricia and Ryan. I didn't want to be anywhere near them at all. But apparently, avoiding the wake completely was not an option, not when Patricia has been working overtime to turn the rest of the family against me. Over the past few days, Mark and I have received countless messages from relatives demanding that we attend. They dress it up as an act of respect, but the implicit message is clear. This is about appearances, about damage control, and, of course, Patricia has been so generous with my supposed betrayal that she continues to encourage everyone to forgive me. Her latest performance is that of the long-suffering and self-sacrificing widow who believes in family above all else. Despite what I supposedly did, I no longer care what they think of me. I don't care if they've convinced themselves that I'm a thief, if they believe I deserve to be taken away from Henry's life in his last days. They've already made their decision. Fighting it won't change anything. They're like her diehard followers. But Mark and I have decided we're going. Not because we care about Patricia or what her followers think, but for ourselves. We'll only attend the last day of the wake. One more day to endure before we are completely free. I hate the idea of walking into that room and becoming the center of Patricia's show. But you know what? Let them do it. While Patricia is too busy controlling the family and Ryan is still dreaming of his inheritance, Mark and I are making preparations to leave. Not just the city, but the whole country. For months now, we've been planning to become digital nomads. Both Mark and I work in fields that allow us to work remotely, and after everything we've been through, we realized that we no longer want to be here. We have nothing left in this place, not even a real family. We want to start over. It's just a little more suffering before we achieve our freedom. I will not interact with Patricia. I will not play her game. I will stand with Mark with my head held high, and I will get through the day without giving her what she wants. After this comes the funeral and then the reading of the will. And after that, Patricia and Ryan can stay in their toxicity while we move on with our lives, far, far away from them. Update 3. I needed to get away and write this because I am so angry right now that I can barely write due to the trembling of my hands. I knew today would be difficult, but I never imagined that Patricia would take her performance to such a level. Mark and I arrived at the wake as planned, and as soon as we set foot in the room, I knew the day was going to be terrible. Patricia was in her element, moving around the room like a grieving widow. But every time someone approached to offer their condolences, she bowed her head just enough, brought a handkerchief to her completely dry eyes, and stood there, receiving all the attention. And then she saw us. She made a show of approaching, moving slowly, with an expression of pain and understanding. And when she reached us, she spoke loudly enough to make sure that everyone present could hear her. She said she knew we would come because, in the end, family always finds its way back in these difficult moments. I almost lost it there and then. The way she said it, the forced sweetness of her tone, made it sound like she was the victim. I hated her guts. She put it so sweetly, so generously, knowing full well what she was doing. And of course there were relatives watching the whole scene. I had to make a superhuman effort not to react. I wanted to shout at her, but we were in the middle of a wake, and if I did, it would give her more reason to continue with her story. Partly she was doing it to gain sympathy, and partly to provoke me into reacting and giving her just what she needed, proof that I was the bad guy. Who yells at a poor widow at her husband's funeral, or argues with her in such a situation? But Patricia wasn't finished. All the time we were there, she found ways to throw little verbal jabs at us. She talked about how unfortunate it had been that Henry had been so preoccupied in his last days, pausing long enough for the insinuation to be crystal clear, before adding that, at least now, he was at peace. But the worst was when, in conversation with another guest, she mentioned Henry's generosity, emphasizing how much he had given even when it was undeserved. When we finally managed to get away from the crowd for a moment, Mark looked at me and asked if I wanted to leave. I didn't hesitate for a second. We left as soon as we could without creating a scene. We left earlier than planned, but at least we had paid our respects to the deceased. But that doesn't mean we weren't affected. Being the best person in a situation like that isn't easy, but it's the right thing to do. Tomorrow is the funeral and the reading of the will. I need to get my strength back for that, that's why I'm writing. Reading your comments helps me a lot. We've been reading all the messages, and I just wanted to express my gratitude. Really. Update 4. After the reading of the will, Mark and I finally gained our freedom, and we are now living abroad, settling into our new lives. I have lost track of time, which is why I have not updated in 2 months. I am sorry. Between adapting to a new country, dealing with all the logistics of the move, and just trying to catch my breath after everything that's happened, I've barely had time to sit down to write. But now, with this life ahead of us, I think I can take a moment to tell you everything that happened in detail. Oh, and as if that weren't enough, we're expecting a baby. It was a complete surprise. With everything that had happened, pregnancy was the last thing on our minds, but life had other plans. When we saw the positive test, everything changed. Suddenly, our goal was not only to escape our toxic past, but to make sure that our future child was not born into that environment. Mark is completely happy, and so am I, but he's already talking nonstop about all the things he wants to do as a father. Plans and more plans. I don't think it's easy having a child abroad, but at home it would have been even worse. Of that, I have no doubt. But before our life could improve, we had to endure one last battle, the reading of the will. That day, Patricia and Ryan entered the office as if they were celebrating a triumphal parade after winning the world championship. Neither of them could hide their happiness at being so close to getting their hands on Henry's money. Meanwhile, Mark and I sat in silence, prepared for the final blow that we thought was inevitable. We had already accepted that Henry had changed the will under Patricia's influence. We had already assumed that this would be just one last humiliation that we would have to endure before cutting off contact with them forever. But then the lawyer began to read Henry's final decision. It was not at all what Patricia and Ryan expected, and it was certainly not what we had imagined. To begin with, Ryan, the favorite child, Mom's favorite, barely figured in the will. Henry left him only a fraction of what he expected, much less than he had taken for granted. I could see the panic on his face as the lawyer continued to read. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Henry had set very strict conditions for Ryan to access his inheritance. His entire share was completely blocked until he became financially independent, which meant having a stable job, a steady income, and proof that he could support himself without Patricia holding his hand. Never in my life have I seen someone go from arrogance to terror so quickly. It was like watching someone crumble in real time. Patricia lost all her elegant composure. Because if that was what was in store for Ryan, she was panicking at the thought of what might happen to her. And then came the final blow. Henry had left legal evidence. Documents proving that Patricia's accusations against me were completely false. Apparently, he wasn't as convinced by her lies as she thought. He had investigated on his own, and before he died, he made sure to leave clear evidence that completely exonerated me. The lawyer handed over documentation that completely destroyed Patricia's supposed evidence. That was his real inheritance, and despite all his efforts to erase me from Henry's life, he still left me a significant portion of the inheritance, as well as the vast majority to my husband. Patricia and Ryan never saw it coming. Patricia demanded to see the documents, insisting that there must be some mistake. Ryan, unable to process what had just happened, started shouting that this wasn't fair, that Henry had promised him more, that he had been deceived. It was absolute chaos, and it was simply glorious to witness. Mark and I sat watching it all fall apart. I hadn't expected it at all. I had already made my peace with the idea that Henry had been manipulated all the way to the end. But in the end, it was his wife and son who had been truly manipulated. When we left the lawyer's office, I felt lighter, freer than I had felt in months. not only because my name had been cleared, but because it was all finally over. Patricia and Ryan were left ruined, completely humiliated. A humiliation that is only just beginning, because the money Henry left will be used to sue my mother-in-law for defamation. A lawsuit that is not only directed at Patricia, because the lawyer who read the will also has orders from Henry to present this evidence to the courts. Because the missing money, the money that Patricia accused me of stealing, was actually stolen by Patricia herself. Henry gave precise instructions that everything be revealed at the reading of the will, and that the formal complaint be made immediately afterwards. Ryan also has a limited period of time to meet the conditions necessary to receive his money, 6 months. After that time has elapsed, the money will be transferred to one of Henry's nieces. He has already wasted 2 months and is in total despair. He has no idea what it means to work, so it's as if he's been asked to tear his own arm off. Sometimes I still think about Henry. Despite his mistakes, despite what happened in the end, I know he would have loved this baby deeply. It breaks my heart to know that he will never meet his grandson. Update 5. We have decided to settle permanently in a country that we believe will be best for our newborn daughter, even though our initial intention was always to be digital nomads. If there is anything that can make us settle in one place, it is having a daughter, so we are completely satisfied with this decision. We also believe that we have chosen one of the best countries for this, as both education and medical care are among the best in the world, and that is fundamental for us at the moment. Neither of us has stopped working, despite having received a generous inheritance from my father-in-law. That money, as well as helping us to finance the lawsuit against my mother-in-law, has been used to create different funds for our daughter and any other children we might have in the future. They will be used to cover her university education, her wedding, and even the purchase of her first home. I'm going to start by talking about Ryan, because a lot of comments started a kind of countdown to see how much time my brother-in-law had left to find a job and thus access his share of the inheritance. Every day someone commented on how many days were left until the deadline. And although he finally got a job, he did not meet all the conditions set out in the will to receive his share. It was fair of his father to impose those requirements because the money should not be a way for Ryan to prolong his immature behavior, but a tool to help him move forward in life. And it wouldn't have been much help if it had simply been handed over to him without any conditions. Then there is our lawsuit for defamation, which, compared to the rest of the consequences, has turned out to be the least significant. In addition to paying attorney's fees and corresponding interest, something that I believe is common in these cases, Patricia had to pay approximately $7,500 in compensation. She was also forced to draft a statement to be published on all her social networks, admitting that she had lied when insinuating that I had stolen that money from Henry. And although we tried to get her to also make a public statement that she had been the one truly responsible for the theft, for legal reasons related to the other lawsuit against her, it was not possible. Her lawyer flatly refused to allow her to make that public statement. In any case, this clarification was a bit redundant considering the other ongoing trial, especially since everyone now knows that Henry himself gave specific orders to denounce his wife. There may still be people who were not aware or who still had their doubts, but after Patricia was found guilty, there must not be a single loyal follower left to continue defending her. Her ship has completely sunk, just like the famous Titanic, and now she has not only had to return all the money she stole, but she has also been sentenced to 1 year in prison. I think it will be quite difficult for her if she ever wants to enter our country to meet her granddaughter. A criminal record is not exactly looked upon favorably by the immigration services,